This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You prepared your kids for their first steps. The first day at school, their first dance, that big test, all the wins along the way. With a College Savings Iowa 529 plan, you'll prepare them for even more. Register before May 31st for a chance to win a $1,000 contribution. Visit collegesavingsiowa.com to make the first move toward a bright future. College Savings Iowa. It's how parents get through college. Administered by the State Treasurer of Iowa.
Hashtag no music, no intro. We are doing an early morning episode with one of our favorite guests. The hashtag Saints for the podcast is ecstatic to have Greg Cosell of NFL Films. If you don't know Greg, he is, I would say, a film savant. Before Ryan and I even started doing this podcast, we would spend text messages talking about Greg's breakdown of prospects. We've talked about Greg over the years, always been a big fan of his. NFL matchups. He is doing his own podcast, the Install. You can catch him on Ross Tucker's podcast. He also does great work with Inside the Birds. I know this is a Saints podcast, but he also does great work talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. Thank you so much for coming on again, Greg. I believe this is now your third appearance on this hashtag Saints Sort of podcast. So we're actually doing a video show. Thank you for being on. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks.
So we're going to get right into it in terms of the 2023 Saints. Looking forward, on paper, they look like they have put together a decent team that can compete, that should be able to compete in the NFC South and potentially in the NFC as a potentially weaker, lesser conference. For right out the bat, I think the big question I'm going to ask is, what did you see on film last year with Derek Carr? Because my opinion is that the Saints will only go as far as Derek Carr can take them as a quarterback taking over the face of the team.
It's funny. I was looking at their roster, obviously knowing I was doing this. I've been so focused on the draft, obviously. And, so I haven't really been studying NFL rosters in detail over the last month or so, pretty much since the season ended. And I got to tell you, I think they have a pretty good roster. I mean, obviously the quarterback situation, was, didn't quite work out the way they anticipated that it would a year ago. And theoretically, they've addressed that. I think last year was kind of it was kind of an odd year because offensively they never seemed to really get on track. Right. And I think that's it's hard to win in this league when your offense is week to week. I'm actually, as we're talking, re-looking at their roster, and I don't know what you guys think, but obviously they need young players to continue to improve, which is always the plan when you draft young players. I mean, certainly they need Trevor Penning to become a starting left tackle. He lost most of his rookie season to injury. They drafted Ryan Berseed this year in the first round. I would expect they would want him to be a starting defensive tackle from the get-go. There's certain things you expect from younger players. At some point they have to play well and they have to, carry their weight. But this is a pretty good team. So I'm really curious because, I think defensively they're going to be very good. Dennis Allen is really, really good as a defensive coach. I know he's the head coach, but it's his defense. I think this could be a really interesting year in a division that we don't really know right now. I mean, it appears not to be one of the stronger divisions in the league.
Right. And one of the things when they signed Derek Carr, one of the things they talked about, Derek Carr talked about, Pete Carmichael, pretty much everybody, even Drew Brees talked about Derek Carr's ability to adjust at the line of scrimmage, going to going to the line of scrimmage with 2 or 3 plays, being able to check from one to another based on what he's seeing from the defense. They didn't have that last year. And that's something the Saints offense has, had for years with Drew Brees, obviously. So they talked about that being like a big strength that they didn't have last year, where they can kind of adjust at the line and, based on what the defenses are doing. Does Derek Carr, does he have that ability? Has he had that ability with the Raiders?
And I think that's critical now, Ryan, in the NFL. Again, I don't use the word great, as you guys know. I don't throw that word out there. But I think to be a higher level quarterback in the NFL nowadays, you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to win a lot of snaps before the ball is snapped, and Derek Carr certainly has that capability. I'm sure they'll give him that freedom at the line of scrimmage. He's been playing now. What is this, his 9th or 10th year? He's somewhere in that range, isn't he?
Something like that.
That's a long time.
So he's played a lot of football, and he's been a starter for a long time. And, I think that he certainly can do that. From everything you hear about Derek Carr, he's a football guy all the way, smart, aware. I think that's a critical piece of an offensive puzzle in today's NFL, because defenses have become so detailed, so nuanced, so subtle in a lot of things that they do, that you need your quarterback. And obviously young quarterbacks can't do this yet, and that's why they're susceptible to certain things. But, you'd expect a veteran quarterback to be able to go to the line of scrimmage, see an indicator, see a key, see a guy just 1 yard where he's not supposed to be, and know that, hey, something's up, and be able to get out of a play or check to a play or whatever it is that they do. I love the way people decide that they know exactly what a quarterback's doing by watching it on TV. No one knows that. But the point is you want your quarterback to be able to do that. And Derek Carr certainly is capable of that.
I want to get back to, you talked about the Saints draft and them drafting Brian Brees in the first round. I was reading your scouting report on him on the 33rd last night, and something that stood out to me is you kind of mentioned that he has the ability to play a 1-gap scheme or a 2-gap scheme in terms of from the interior. I would just, from our listeners' perspective who don't know like the extensive X's and O's of football, can you, like in simplistic terms, like what the difference is between those, like the two attacking positions on the defensive line, if it's a 1-gap scheme or a 2-gap scheme?
Yeah, the first thing you notice about Brisset, and I was on the field at the combine, is he is a big dude.
He is.
He's almost 6'6". He's close to 300 pounds. He's a big man, and he looks the part. So the difference with a 1-gap and a 2-gap. So 1-gap, more often than not, results from what we call under fronts, okay, or over fronts. It's basically an even front, meaning that defensive linemen line up in gaps, not head up over an offensive lineman. So Brisset, he could probably play it as a 1 technique, which means he'd be lining up in a gap between a center and a guard, or he could play it as a 3 technique, where he'd be lining up in a gap just off the guard's outside shoulder, so essentially between the guard and an offensive tackle. That's the 1-gap element, because you're lining up in a gap. And normally when you do that, you're penetrating right at the snap of the ball. You're not waiting to see what happens. You're penetrating. And then obviously you dictate how the offensive line blocks, and your linebackers work off that. Second-level defenders will work off that. If you're playing 2-gap, more often than not, that's what we call odd fronts, where let's say you'll have a nose tackle who's head up on an offensive center, and you'll have, let's say, defensive tackles who could be head up on offensive guards. And what happens there is you're not shooting into a gap because you're head up on an offensive lineman. You are basically hand fighting with the offensive lineman right in front of you and sort of peeking and seeing where the ball goes, on a running play in particular. And then you have to play off that contact with the offensive lineman and go make a play on the ball. So the term we use for that is you want to control and displace the offensive lineman so you can go make a play. Brisset showed the ability to do both those things when he was in college at Clemson.
Interesting. And one thing me and Adam, we've been able to kind of figure out the Saints prototype, as far as like a lot of their a lot of their players, a lot of their prospects, but definitely the defensive line. They like long, big, fast players on the D line, 6'5", 6'6". You saw it with guys like Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, Cam Jordan. They like these big guys instead of the kind of tweener types that that some people do like. Is there like a method to that you see on film, like having those big long guys? Because we kind of go back and forth with the fans. Like, is it a good thing that they do that? Like, because the Saints defense has kind of struggled with a lot of the really mobile quarterbacks like the Jalen Hurts. But look, a lot of people struggle with that also. But at the same time, it's like, is it better to, have like a tweener, like a Nolan Smith or, Hassan Reddick or something like that to kind of, have both elements to your defense?
I mean, that's a philosophy, Brian.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I think Dennis Allen probably feels that schematically he can handle that, handle those kinds of quarterbacks. I haven't done a study of every game they've played against quarterbacks that would be considered mobile, but I think because he's a really good schemer, he probably thinks that schematically he can take care of that. It's clear when you look at their roster now and the players that they have that they've got a lot of length up front. Not only Brissy, but Isaiah Foskey's 6'5". He's another player whose tape I really like coming out of Notre Dame. I mean, they still have Peyton Turner. He seems to be a forgotten man. He's big. They still have Passignon. He's big. They've got, obviously Cam Jordan's been there forever and he's a great player. Granderson is built differently, but he's long as well. So, obviously it's something that they prefer to have, so that there are certain teams that like certain styles of play. It's like teams that say, well, we're not drafting a corner under 6 feet. It becomes a philosophy. And, you pass sometimes on players that may end up being great players. That happened with Aaron Donald for a lot of teams because Aaron Donald is not 6'3". I remember having a great conversation with a defensive line coach the year he came out, and he didn't like Donald a lot for any number of reasons. And I said, and I liked him. That doesn't make me smarter than he is. But I mean, I remember talking to him a few years later, and he said, man, you were right on Aaron Donald. That stuff's a philosophy. So, and there's many different philosophies and many different approaches. And if something doesn't work, it's always easy to say they're wrong. But, that's after the fact is always easy. Anybody can do that. Clearly they have a philosophy. This is what they want, and this is the way they feel they can do what they want to do best.
You brought up a great point on Foskey and Peyton Turner, because both Ryan and I said after that draft pick that it may be a slight indictment of their thoughts of where Peyton Turner is in his career. Both Ryan and I loved Foskey's tape from when we watched it. It was like the antithesis of Peyton Turner's tape when he got drafted from our perspective. What did you see from Foskey as a prospect from Notre Dame? Because I feel like this draft, they really reworked their defensive line. They signed 2 defensive tackles in free agency. They're trying to get pressure up front. What does Foskey bring to the team defensively?
Yeah, Foskey, Adam, he really looks the part now. I mean, he has a lean, compact frame. He looks streamlined. I mean, he looks like he was just, made in a lab. I mean, he's straight line athletic. I mean, that's what he is. He's not really a true bender. So he's a speed to power guy as a pass rusher. He's got long arms. They're 34 inches, which is really good for arm length. He's got strong hands, heavy hands, but he's not necessarily a bender. He's not a flexible pass rusher. The question is, in their defense, do they see him playing as a stand-up player, or do they see him playing with his hand on the ground? You may know more about that than I. I don't know how they see him. But I think that he has pass rush traits to develop and cultivate. He's not there right now, but he's a really athletic guy with a great frame. I mean, he's got size, length. He's athletic. He can be deployed in multiple ways. I mean, in 2021, under a different defensive coaching staff, he played a lot of stacked linebacker. Now, I don't think they see him as a stacked linebacker. In 2022, with a different staff, he played almost exclusively on the ball, on the edge, both in a 2-point stance and in a 3-point stance.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You mentioned the 2-point stance, standing up, and because I noticed that too. Watching him, he was standing up a lot, and
A
I mean the
lot.
Saints have shown willingness to be flexible with that.
Yep.
Like I think they would prefer you be in a 3-point stance, but if you're at best at your 2-point stance, they let you do it and kind of just learn on the job. But
Yeah, and that gets back, Ryan, to the point of how they see him overall. I mean, obviously he's a second round pick. So when you draft someone in the second round, you would at least think that, hey, maybe they have a chance to start. Okay, maybe, you see how it goes through the OTAs and training camp, but we know Cam Jordan's going to start on one side at DN. The question is, who starts on the other side at DN?
Right.
When they're in their base defense, and however percentage of snaps you're in your base, maybe it's 25%, 35%. That depends, of course, on your opponent as well. And the opponents you face, I guess, will find. You guys know who they're facing. We don't know the schedule yet. That comes out in a couple of days. But, the question is, can he line up as the other defensive end? Now, even if he's the other defensive end, if he's more comfortable in a 2-point stance, they may say, hey, play in a 2-point stance if that's the way you're more comfortable. I don't think they're going to have a rule that states you better be in a 3-point stance or else. The question is, what's he more comfortable doing? I personally thought his traits came out better in a 2-point stance. That was just my sense of watching the tape.
Right.
Yeah. We hit on the offense and last season, and it was some bad offensive football, and whether that be the offensive line being injured, injuries to Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton. I was at the San Francisco game in person where they didn't score a single point. So they really have gone this offseason to try to address that, getting Derek Carr, signing Jamal Williams. And in the draft, they drafted Keandre Miller out of TCU in the 3rd round. And in the 6th round, they traded back into the 6th round and drafted A.T. Perry. Can you just, if you had thoughts on Perry and Miller's prospects, what they potentially could bring to the Saints offense that does need a lot of juice?
Well, I would think let's start with Miller. I would think if all goes well, Miller's not playing a lot of snaps because they signed Jamal Williams, who last year, now he's not going to get 270 snaps with the Saints, but I would think that Jamal Williams and Kamara would be their backfield combination. Now, Kamara does have a little bit of an injury history here and there. So, obviously that made sense for them to draft Kendre Miller out of TCU, who's kind of an interesting back because he's got some explosive traits to him. He's not really a sustainer, but they don't need him to be a sustainer because they've got Jamal Williams. Even though he's 215 pounds, to me, his tape was much more that of a scat back than of a strong, physical, tough runner. I thought he had short area burst. I thought he had darting, slashing quickness at the 2nd and 3rd levels. I thought he had accelerating speed. I thought he could run away from the defense. I think to me, he's a complementary type runner. That's how I saw him. And I think based on where he was drafted, that's probably how the league saw him. But, I think that in an ideal world, guys, and I think you would probably agree that if all goes well, he wouldn't get a lot of snaps this year because we know what Kamara is if he can play 17 games. We know what Jamal Williams last year, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe he had 250 or so carries. Like I said, that won't happen with the Saints, but he's that guy, so it would seem to me that's a really strong 1-2 punch. As far as A.T. Perry, I actually really liked A.T. Perry, and I was kind of surprised he got drafted where he did. Now, I think I understand why. Normally, I understand why. It doesn't mean I always agree with it, and that's okay. Reasonable people can disagree on evaluations of players. I thought this kid had size, length. He was smooth. He was fluid. He's a glider. Stride length at 6'3.5". Stride length is a trait. People don't think of it that way, but when you can eat up ground, particularly versus off coverage, when you can eat up ground coming off the ball, that is a trait. And I watched all his targets from 2021 and all his targets from 2022. And that's a lot of targets. That's 265 plays, give or take. The more I watched him, the more I liked him. So again,
Right.
I don't know the kid, so I can't speak to mental toughness. I can't speak to any of those things that I don't get to do, that teams get to do. Maybe he fell short in some of those other categories that I can't be aware of. And maybe that's why he was a 6th-round pick, because a 6th-round pick, you're taking a flyer more than saying this is the guy. But I thought his tape was suggested that he could have been a much higher pick.
Right. I thought the same thing because I didn't know anything about him before the draft. But after the draft, I went and I found every little cut up I could find of him. And just like you said, the more I watched, I was like, this guy is good, man. Like, I mean, with the 6th round, you're thinking, well, maybe he can make the team, maybe not. I'm like, this guy should contribute. You know what I'm saying? Like, he should contribute to this offense. We'll see at what point. But if he could be the 4th or 5th wide receiver, like, yeah, because he was so productive the last 2 years with Wake Forest. I mean, I don't see why not, unless, like we say, something mental,
Yeah, and which, again, none of us know, and then maybe that's it. Again, you still have the Michael Thomas question. He hasn't played football in, 2 years? More than 2 years? So, obviously when he was at his best, he was terrific, and he was really your classic boundary X, the receiver who would line up to the short side of the field, and they would have a great 2-man route concepts with he and Kamara, who was either offset to the boundary or even aligning, as a detached receiver to the boundary. But, he really hasn't played, so we don't know where he stands right now. So, obviously Olave had a really good rookie year, better than I thought, to be totally honest. I was surprised at the success that
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'll hey, when I evaluate a guy, and if a guy exceeds what I think he can be, I don't hide from that. The thing about this business is I'm just sitting in my office here watching tape, and that's all I have. And I didn't think Olave could do what he did at the NFL level in his first year. I really didn't. So he was very, very good. He's incredibly smooth. Obviously he's one receiver. They're, depending on Thomas, they're really looking for a third. I mean, they got some big plays here and there from Shaheed last year. The question is, can he be more than that? And we don't know the answer to that. They may not know the answer to that. Traquan Smith is still around. I feel like he's been around for 100 years.
We'd feel the same, Greg.
We'll see. I mean, they have one guy who's on the roster, and he's at the point in his career now where it's probably an extreme long shot, but I always thought Brian Edwards was going to be a good NFL player. He was a 4-year starter at South Carolina, and I thought he was a really good prospect. And again, I can't tell you why it didn't work out, but I thought that guy could be a quality NFL receiver. And now he's at the point, like I said, where he's really a camp body, and now he's hoping to make a team, and it's the Saints right now. But, again, I'm just throwing that out because, again, he's a guy I liked. I guess I've been wrong on up to this point because it hasn't worked out.
He did have a good rapport with Derek Carr when he was with the Raiders for a brief period of time. They seem to be on the same page, and I feel like if there's a chance for Brian Edwards to succeed, him being back with Derek Carr is going to will help him more than anything.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, when guys come in like that, they really have to show well throughout all the off-season activities through training camp. I mean, nothing's going to be handed to that kid, but the likelihood of him making it is probably pretty slim at this point. So it's really Olave. It's what Thomas is or isn't at this point. I guess none of us really know the answer to that. So receiver is probably a position where there are going to be some opportunities for good competition. And we'll see what happens after that. I really like the tight end Johnson. I'll be curious to see if he becomes a bigger part of the offense in terms of target share. Because he went to Penn State as a wide receiver. He was a wide receiver his last year in college at Oregon, and obviously became a tight end in the NFL. But he's got some traits, some movement traits. He's a seam stretcher. He's a vertical dimension as a tight end.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's improved like every year as a tight end.
Yes.
Because his first year was as a wide receiver, couldn't really do much to get on the field. Second year, they moved to the tight end, showed a little something. Then his third year, he's like, okay, we're starting to see it. And for them to extend him this offseason, that was like a high priority for them. So yeah, that should be interesting. Plus,
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say he's Darren Waller, but he's,
right,
like I said, I'm not going to say he's Darren Waller, but he can run those kinds of routes. He's got the ability to run, intermediate routes like crossers, overs. He can run seam routes. I mean, he can attack the field at all three levels.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Granger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You prepared your kids for their first steps. The first day at school, their first dance. That big test. All the wins along the way. With a College Savings Iowa 529 plan, you'll prepare them for even more. Register before May 31st for a chance to win a $1,000 contribution. Visit collegesavingsiowa.com to make the first move toward a bright future. College Savings Iowa. It's how parents get through college. Administered by the State Treasurer of Iowa.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
I have a question. Getting back to the whole prototype and prospects. Do you remember what your thoughts were on Peyton Turner as a prospect? And I ask that sincerely because, I feel like him taking a step and a jump would just be such an unexpected surprise. Ryan and I were at his best game as a pro. We were at the Raiders game where he had 2.5 sacks or 2 sacks. But it seems like whether it be injury or just inconsistent play, he's been healthy scratches at times. What did you see on film from him at Houston? Because I feel like this really is a huge upcoming season for his career.
Oh, yeah. I liked his tape coming out. I mean, he had size, he had arm length, he had great physical dimensions. I thought he was a big man who played with power. I thought he was more than athletic enough, not a great sudden athlete, but more than athletic enough. I thought he was front diverse, could line up in different spots. I thought he was actually a pretty strong prospect. And when they took him, it was late in the first round, was it not?
It was.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought to myself, hey, I like that pick. I mean, I thought he played with strength. He could generate power because power is really just strength and motion. I thought he could generate power. I thought he was able to play off contact. He wasn't a true bender, but he wasn't totally stiff either. I kind of saw him, and we'll see what happens this year. I kind of saw him as an ascending player who, when given a chance, could play well. We're dealing with a guy. I don't know what he weighs now, but I guess he weighed 270 at that time when he came out of college. I don't know how all that works out now, but I liked him, and thought he could be a really good player in the NFL. Or let's put it this way, really good, maybe too strong, but absolutely a contributing player on a good defensive line.
No, I think we all hoped, but just had to seem to work out that way so far. We'll see what happens. I want to ask you about the quarterback they drafted out of Fresno State, Jake Hayner. Because I watched a little bit of him, and the more, he was another guy. Like, the more you watch, he was like, okay, I kind of see it. Not saying he's going to blow the world off his doors, but this dude can kind of play.
Well, I love Jake Hayner. Believe me, I know what he is. He's under 6 feet, but he is a really fun watch. I started by going back to when they played UCLA in 2021. And they beat UCLA down in L.A., and he played literally most of the second half with a torn oblique. And you could see literally every throw he just bent over because, he had a torn oblique. And obviously, look, you guys had a 6-foot quarterback who played, as a Hall of Famer for years. But, historical precedent says that 6-foot pocket quarterbacks don't normally make it. Okay. Obviously, right. Breeze is the great exception. But this guy he's physically and mentally quick twitch. He's got a really strong sense of timing and rhythm to his game. He was decisive turning it loose. It showed up in every single game. I just kept watching games, and I get the coaching tape, so I'm just watching games. You can see on the tape how tough mentally and he was, how tough physically he was, how competitive he was. I really, really like that kid. I mean, I said in my transition, I said he will more than likely be a day 3 pick, and there is no question that he will not be drafted as a starting quarterback given his size and lack of what would be considered more elite physical and arm talent traits. But his college tape showed a quarterback who played to the details and subtleties and nuances of the position with higher level processing, excellent field vision, a refined feel for the timing and rhythm in the passing game, an understanding of progressions, a willingness to turn it loose. I mean, I really like Jake Haener a lot.
Wow. Yeah, that's like some good check boxes.
It is. It's like one of the things that stood out to me just watching him very briefly is you could quickly see how quickly he processes and reads the defense. Yep. And he throws, and I think it's huge for especially young quarterbacks, he throws with anticipation. He doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't have to be open. And I feel like what you kind of read, and I'm not comparing them as prospects, but there's some similarities just in what you read, those check boxes with kind of what Brock Purdy was able to do. And I don't want people to say, oh, I'm saying Jake Haener's the next Brock Purdy.
Well, and everybody now who's a later round pick is going to be compared to Brock Purdy.
Right.
Who's not, quote unquote, super physically gifted. That's going to be the new way people talk about it now. Well, he's Brock Purdy, and I didn't love Purdy coming out. I'll be and again, he's only played whatever number games. Right. Obviously, the Niners have made their decision. They're with him every day, so they feel he's now going to be their guy, and maybe he'll be great. Who knows? But I really like Jake Haener's tape a lot, and I know people who know him. I know someone who's worked with him, and they echo everything I've said.
The last one I have for you, Greg, is a scheme-ish question. So last season, the Saints dealt with the departures of Marcus Williams, who left to the Ravens. They traded C.D. Deuce to the Eagles right before the season, and Malcolm Jenkins retired. What did you see defensively that DA did in terms of the defense as opposed to how it was prior to last season? Obviously, there was a lot of two-man high was what they typically ran when they had Marcus Williams and single high. How did the defense change with those?
I'm trying to remember. Obviously, they're a team that on third down plays a lot of two-man, maybe as much as any team in the league. They play two-man coverage. Obviously, if you're going to play two-man coverage, you're relying on your 4-man pass rush because it's just numbers. Two-man coverage requires 7 people in coverage, so you can only rush 4. And my guess is the pass rush probably wasn't exactly what they hoped it would be a year ago. Dennis Allen, though he's always been very good with blitzes as well. So the question is, how does he see that this year? Ultimately, we don't know the answer to that simply because of, there's some different people. Obviously, Jordan is, he's still a really good player. I don't think whether he's just getting older and we see a slight decline or whether he just didn't have his best year. We don't know the answer to that. I mean, he came in the league in 2011. He's been playing a long time. You can make an argument he's a Hall of Famer. Because he has 120 sacks or something like that, somewhere in that range. Yeah. But Bressee's going to be an interesting guy in that regard. How are they going to use Foskey? Can Peyton Turner become a pass rusher? I think they still have questions with their defensive front. Right. Most defensive coaches will tell you this, guys. Most, and again, it all depends on the rest of your team. There's a lot of variables, but most defensive coaches will tell you that if you can't pressure the quarterback with 4, then you've got to add another guy. I mean, you can't let quarterbacks sit there, because you can play all the best coverage in the world, but after a certain amount of time, it doesn't matter, especially if you're going to play some form of zone, because every zone has holes and zones are not meant to hold up. Think of it this way. Almost every zone is really meant for 3-step timing and 5-step timing. If you get 7-step drop timing with a quarterback, zones will not hold up. The holes appear. So, man can be a little different, obviously, because you're matching up. But at the end of the day, you need to get pressure on quarterbacks. And whether you want to do that through blitz, one thing they did a lot of is what we call zone exchanges too, where they rush 4, but the 4th guy would be either, let's say, Demario Davis, or it would be a defensive back. They play a lot of dime on 3rd down, and they play a lot of 3-2 dime, where they have 3 down linemen and 2 linebackers. So we'll see if they continue to do that. I mean, that's been a Dennis Allen thing for the last number of years. They did it a couple of years ago when they had Quan Alexander. It was Alexander, Demario Davis. They did it last year with Warner, and then when he got hurt, they did it with Ellis and obviously Demario, who's a great player. So we'll see. But then you're relying on sort of scheme and movement and where guys are lined up, because that 4th rusher is not just coming from a traditional, conventional defensive line alignment.
Exactly. Well, we'll let you go, Greg. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have any more questions. Adam, you got anything?
Just last one, just before I forget. Alontae Taylor played in spurts, outstanding last season. You talked about sometimes you're wrong. Ryan and I were completely wrong as him as a prospect and how he played last season. Just from, that's like our fans' perspective, how he played. From someone who really dives into the tape, what did you see from him for such a young player at corner in his first season in the starts that he did have?
Thought he played well. I loved him coming out of Tennessee. I remember when he came out of Tennessee, a lot of people, draft gurus, whatever you want to call them, said, well, he's a safety. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you, out of your mind? The guy's 6 feet. He runs a 4.4. He's got length. He's not a safety. He's a corner. And I actually had this conversation with Jeff Ireland. And I said, people are thinking about him as a corner. And he looked at me like, no. I mean, as a safety. And he looked at me like, no, he's a corner. And I saw him as a corner all the way. And because of Lattimore being hurt a good part of the year, Taylor got a lot of snaps. I thought he played well. I like Alontae Taylor a lot. Now, obviously, with everybody healthy, it certainly appears that Debo and Lattimore would be the starting outside corners. I'm not sure if they see Taylor down the road as a slot guy. Obviously, Roby's still here, but he's older. So I don't know how they see that. But I thought Taylor really handled himself well last year, and he's a corner.
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, Ryan and I are on board that Alontae and Lattimore should be starting if everyone's healthy. But it's a good problem to have. You can never have a good enough defensive backs. But thank you so much.
No, and you never have enough
Greg.
corners in this league. Yeah, you never have enough corners in this league. So they're not going to get rid of anybody. Right now they have, including Taylor, they've got 4 corners that I think you can line up and play any given week. And no, he's not going anywhere.
What an amazing conversation. You can follow Greg on Twitter at Greg Cosell. Listen to him on the Ross Tucker's podcast, The Install. In NFL matchups will start up again this season on ESPN. So please make sure, if you have the opportunity to watch those shows, even if they're on early, they're great knowledge for deep football dives. Thank you so much for making this your 3rd appearance, Greg. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Greg.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.